Long before the Western world began to view samurai warriors as inherently male, there existed a group of female samurai, every bit as powerful and deadly as their male counterparts. They were known as the Onna Bugeisha, and they were trained in the same way men were in self-defense and offensive maneuvers. They were even trained to use a weapon specifically designed for women, to allow them better balance given their smaller stature, called a Naginata, a long pole sporting a shorter curved blade, as opposed to the typical katana or wakizashi wielded by the men. The Naginata was a great weapon to keep enemies at bay, which served women well, as they were able to ward off their stronger male enemies, keeping them at distance until they were ready to strike. For years, they fought alongside the male samurai, being held to the same standards and expected to perform the same duties. In this video, I'll be talking about 3 women in particular, 2 of which who were considered to be of the Onna Bugeisha, and 1 who came long before, though I thought was equally important to mention. But let's start with the first, more famous legend. Her name was Tamagozen, and she appears in the Samurai Chronicles in the later half of the 12th century. She was said to be an expert martial artist, going on to become a teacher of martial arts before having a role of a more military nature. It may be worth pointing out first that it was not uncommon for women in feudal Japan to receive martial art training. Between the 12th and 9th centuries, women of the samurai class were trained to not only use the sword, but also the naginata, as I described earlier, which many favoured, as well as the bow and arrow. Nevertheless, the role of these female warriors was primarily defensive in nature, as they were expected to protect themselves and their homes in the event of an enemy attack. What sets Tamagozen apart from her fellow warrior women was that she was trained for offensive skirmishes, rather than the defensive scenarios in which many others were prepared for. But Tamagozen, despite being one of the Onna Bugeisha who stand out the most, is only mentioned in one account, in the tale of Haika, during the Genpei War of the 12th century. There aren't actually any other written records of Gozen's life, which understandably has led to many historians questioning the legitimacy of her existence. But as we always do on this channel, we'll speculate and try to decipher what we think is real and what isn't, as I like to believe there has to be some truth in every tale. Tamagozen is described as having black hair and fair skin, perhaps so strikingly beautiful that she stood out. She was also noted as being a fearless rider, one who was skilled with a horse and possibly more skilled than many of her male counterparts. It's said that she was able to maintain full functionality of the bow whilst riding at fast speeds, and was as dexterous as she would have been standing on flat ground. The tale of Haika quotes her as being fit to meet either god or devil on the battlefield. As you can imagine, given what little evidence we have on Gozen's existence, we know nothing about her childhood or early life. We can understand from the tale of Haika that she would wind up serving the samurai lord, Minamoto Yoshinaka, in the Genpei War between the Minamoto clan and the Taira clan, though it's been speculated that Gozen was just his wife, his mistress, or merely a servant. Tamagozen has a few instances of battle that are documented in the tale of Haika, though all of them center on the Genpei War between the rebellious Minamoto clan and the Taira clan in their dispute to decide a ruler of Japan. The first instance we see Tamagozen in battle is when she was deployed by Yoshinaka in the Battle of Yokotogawara in 1181. It was during this battle that Gozen proved that she could stand just as tall as her male counterparts, going on to decapitate 7 men and place their heads on pikes so that all would know of her skill. Her presence on the battlefield would become so significant that the Minamoto clan would entrust her to lead a force of 1,000 men at the Battle of Tonomiyama in 1183. Minamoto Yoshinaka would find himself engaged in the battle with his cousin, Minamoto Yoshitsune, at what is known as the Battle of Awazu in 1184. It would be Yoshinaka's last stand against his cousin's forces, where there are many accounts of his fate. For Yoshinaka, it's been said that he found a nice quiet spot for which to commit seppuku before he could be killed. Another instance has him trying to escape, only for his horse to become mired in icy mud, allowing for his cousin's forces to catch up to him and fill him with arrows. A more insidious account suggests that after his horse was stuck in the mud, Yoshinaka placed a sword in his mouth and jumped from the horse, decapitating or impaling himself upon hitting the ground. In the instance of Tamagozen, the legend has it that Yoshinaka's army would be mostly wiped out by his cousin's army of 6,000 men, reducing his own number to only just 5. Amongst those 5 was Tamagozen, sword in hand and ready to face down the oncoming enemy, regardless of the odds. By this point she would have already earned her fearsome reputation, and was known for going up against men with such a ferocity that it was hard to distinguish her from a regular samurai. However, Yoshinaka would order her to leave the battlefield, claiming that it would bring him shame if he died with a woman by his side. The implication of this would obviously leave Yoshinaka further short-handed, not that he would stand much of a chance anyway, but socially, it also serves to remind us of the hierarchy between men and women in feudal Japan, that it would be considered a disgrace to die being defended by a woman. The idea that feudal Japan was very much a man's world, despite women taking up swords, rings out very true in this instance. Reluctantly, Gozen obeyed her master's orders, but was said to behead an approaching enemy, as if to demonstrate both her skill and frustration at having been dismissed. In another version, Gozen seeks the permission of Yoshinaka to obtain a final kill in honor of him, which he agrees. Gozen was said to stride into the oncoming enemy horde, singled out the strongest and most reputed man amongst them, Onda no Hachiro, and beheaded him. In an extended version of the tale of Haika, Tamagozen was said to have been defeated by Wada Yoshimori, a vassal and military commander of the Kamakura shogunate who came into conflict with Gozen after the death of Minamoto Yoshinaka. She wasn't outright killed, however, and was instead forced to have become his concubine. Another story suggesting the fate of Tamagozen states that she became a nun and would live the remainder of her days mostly in peace. A third story depicts Tamagozen avenging the death of Minamoto Yoshinaka by slaying his enemies, though it isn't detailed as to whether she did this alone, through a use of deceptions and assassinations, or whether she raised armies to wage war, both of these being terribly unlikely, considering these 2 events have never been documented. In the event that she did slay Yoshinaka's enemies, perhaps most notably his cousin, Minamoto Yoshisune, she was later said to have taken Yoshinaka's head and walked off into the sea with it, as perhaps a token of her love for him, or merely so that Yoshisune's men could not defile it. Her fate, however, ultimately remains a mystery to us. The next female warrior from Japan I'd like to talk about is Naginata Takeko, a woman who we have a little more credible information on. We know that she was born in the Aizu region, sometime in the 19th century, when the ruling Tokugawa shogunate was essentially on its last legs, and was deep at war with the Japanese imperial court, a war known as the Boshin War. Nakano would study martial arts and sword fighting from a young age in Edo, now modern-day Tokyo, going on to become a skilled instructor in the use of the Naginata. She showed so much promise with her blade that her teacher would actually adopt her as his own. Although things would turn out pretty weird when he tried to arrange a marriage with her, one she certainly turned down before effectively relocating back to her home in Aizu in the mid-1800s. It was during this time that we see the Tokugawa shogunate, after nearly 300 years of domination, begin to fall during the Boshin War. The Tokugawa shogunate would actually surrender in May 1868, but it had a massive following of loyalists who refused to accept defeat. Nakano was one of these loyalists, who with her mother and sister would join an army dedicated to repelling the Japanese Imperials from Aizu. In the Battle of Aizu, which took place in 1868, Nakano would form her own independent unit of 20 female warriors, armed with the Naginata. It was this group that would be retrospectively known as the Joshi Tai, meaning the woman's army, who would take part mainly in a counterattack designed to breach Aizu. It was here that Nakano is said to have killed 5 of the Japanese Imperials before taking a bullet to the chest. In her dying moments, she requested her sisters to take her head so that the enemy would not have the honour of claiming it themselves. Her sister agreed and beheaded her, taking her head to a temple in Hokoji and burying it beneath a pine tree. Needless to say, the Tokugawa shogunate was overcome by the Japanese Imperials, and the women of Nakano's band of warriors were either killed or simply drifted off. Finally, I'd like to talk about perhaps one of the earliest recorded accounts of a female warrior in Japanese history, a woman who went by the name Empress Jingu, way back in the 3rd century. Much like our previous 2 ladies, this one doesn't have too much in the way of evidence to support her entire existence, given that this particular legend is over 2,000 years old. It's understood that she was a consort to Emperor Chuai, and served Japan as regent until Emperor Chuai died in the year 269, whereupon her son Ojin ascended the throne. But what makes Empress Jingu stand out? Well, let's start with her divine powers. You see, Empress Jingu was considered to be something of a shaman, one who played around with mystical jewels that in some sources claim to have given her control over the tide. You'd think that with control over the tide, she'd be able to rule the world, but I guess she set her sights a little lower and decided to start attacking Korea instead. The legend is a little sketchy here, some saying that she led a force on horseback and took Korea by means of blood, whilst others say she managed to take the entire land without shedding a single drop. Maybe she drowned them all with the tide? Or maybe she was able to negotiate. As you can imagine, the notion that she was able to conquer Korea is widely rejected. I mean, if Toyotomi Hideyoshi couldn't do it, then I'm pretty sure it's kind of impossible. Still, there is some evidence to suggest that Japan did gain a foothold in Korea, ruling over at least some of the southern territory by the 4th century. Care to hear some more crazy stories about Empress Jingu? Well, when she went to battle in Korea, she was actually pregnant, but her son Ojin wouldn't be born until she returned to Japan 3 years later. So basically, Ojin was the most patient baby in history, and understood that his mother was busy, and so waited until she was safely back in Japan before making his entrance. Some say that Ojin was actually the Buddhist god of war, Hachiman, and willfully remained in her womb for 3 years so as to give her the time she needed to conquer Korea. But Empress Jingu, despite her, shall we say, interesting accounts, would end up being depicted as a powerful entity representing Japan's colonial aspirations, so much so that she would be featured on Japan's paper money in 1881. She would be the first woman to be featured on a banknote in Japan. Her final resting place is, as you can imagine, unknown, but there is a tomb designated to her at Misasagi-cho in Nara. Either way, regardless of the truth surrounding the stories of Empress Jingu, or Tamagozen and Nakano Takeko, they have no doubt inspired many generations of Japanese people, both men and women alike. It's a shame that the warrior women of Japanese history have been so carelessly detailed. It's almost as if the men at the time simply didn't bother recording their efforts. Either that or none of them were actually real. But I think hastily coming to that conclusion is a disservice to what these 3 women and Onna Bugeisha represent. For even if they aren't real historical figures, they represent Japanese women who at the time were likely to be considered lesser or otherwise denied of certain honours that they were indeed capable of achieving. The Onna Bugeisha, after all, were indeed established to defend homes, and may very well have had some epic if not grueling experiences in battles and war. However, because they were women, or of a low nobility, these accounts were simply not documented. Therefore, I like to think that the women we've covered today, whether real or fictitious, do indeed reflect the strength and resolve of Japanese women at the time. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about each of these lovely ladies, and whether or not you think they actually existed or not. Our next legend was an outlaw, who I guess you could describe as the Japanese Robin Hood. Until the next time, folks.